Climate change is a very serious threat, and its consequences impact many different aspects of our lives and our world. In this film, we will look at the following 3 points. First, temperature and weather. Second, wildlife and biodiversity. And last, social consequences of climate change. Because of the climate crisis, the world experiences more frequent heat waves. This because of how the average global temperature increases. One example is United Kingdom in the summer of 2022, which declared a national emergency when breaking the previous record of highest temperature recorded. The previous one was from 2019, just 3 years prior. Heat waves alone can cause multiple consequences to infrastructure and vulnerable members of population, especially in those parts of the world that lack access to clean water. A consequence of higher surface temperature is sea level rise. Warmer temperatures and more frequent heat waves are causing the melting of ice, which is causing the sea level to rise little by little. The prediction is that Europe will experience an average of 60 to 80 centimeters rise by the end of the century. A consequence is populated land underwater and that salt water gets into bodies of fresh water. This means that the sea level rise reduces the amount of available fresh water, affecting the supply of drinking water. Imagine what would happen to cities such as Venice, Italy, or Miami, Florida, if sea level rises by 60 centimeters. How many buildings and establishments would then be submerged underwater? Another change in weather is more frequent heavy rain and flooding. Longer and heavier monsoons cause floodings, like in Pakistan in the summer of 2022, which experienced 3 months of heavy rains after a prolonged period of heat in the spring. The flooding killed more than 1,400 people across the country and damaged or leveled more than 1 million homes. Many homes were just swept away by the water. In addition to people, buildings and infrastructure, rivers are filled with mud and much of the country's farmland is underwater. These changes in temperature and weather have severe consequences to people and infrastructure already. Imagine where we will be in the future if these changes in climate keeps accelerating. Climate also affects wildlife and biodiversity. Biodiversity is the variety of plant and animal life in the world or in a particular habitat, a high level of which is usually considered to be important and desirable. This variety is important in all aspects of nature, both on land and in water. In coastal habitats, the biodiversity of barrier reefs is affected through warmer temperatures, higher sea levels, and more frequent extreme weather. In wetlands, unique bird and plant species are threatened by climate change, as wetlands will be lost. The birds and plant species living in wetlands will therefore lose their homes and their protection. We can also see changes in biodiversity on land. There are changes in natural habitats as an effect of activities like clearing forests and expansions of roads and cities, in addition to pollution of air, water, and soil. Simply put, many plants and animal species are struggling to cope due to climate change. Climate change also brings along with it many social consequences. As if the list of consequences weren't long enough already, climate change has an impact on millions of people. What social threats are brought on by climate change? Changes in climate, like for example weather and temperatures, can bring with it death and illness. Especially elderly and infants are at a high risk of illness or even death. The millions of people living in poverty, already affected deeply by the lack of resources, are facing greater challenges in terms of extreme events due to changes in climate. Some are losing their livelihood, especially in countries depending on farmland and crops, where weather plays a vital part in whether their livelihood survives or not. Some parts of the world already suffer from minimal food and water resources, where changes in weather can be catastrophic. As you can see, these first 4 points are intertwined with each other, where one can cause the other, like a domino effect. illustrating how fragile our world might be. We can also see that climate change already has started to have an impact on migration, as people living in parts of the world where they depend heavily on their natural environment also have the least resources to cope with the climate change. There is no question, some parts of the world are more exposed and more vulnerable to climate change than others. People living in low-income urban areas with poor infrastructure and lower incomes are more exposed to climate impacts, but have less capacity to face them. This is affecting their health, their livelihood, and access to food and water. Education and raising awareness to these issues and these consequences are an important component in managing the impacts of climate change. The consequences of climate change are many. Too many to fit into a relatively short film, but these 3 points mentions some of them. And here is an overview.